Welcome back to Sipping on Wellness. Whether you're out for a walk, driving down the road, or enjoying a quiet moment with your favorite drink, I'm glad you're here. I want to start today with a question. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to believe that the answer is just one more thing away? One more supplement someone recommended on social media? One more lab test? One more protocol? One more expert? One more podcast episode? One more book? One more piece of information that will finally help everything click? I think most of us have been there at one point or another. We genuinely want to feel better. We want more energy. We want fewer symptoms. We want to understand what's happening in our bodies. And because of that, we keep looking. We keep searching. We keep hoping the next thing will be the next thing that changes everything. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm a huge believer in education. I love learning. I love understanding how the body works, and there are absolutely times when testing, targeted support, and deeper investigation are appropriate. But over the years, I've noticed something interesting. Many women aren't struggling because they don't have enough information. They're struggling because they don't know what to trust. One expert says one thing, another says the opposite. Social media is full of conflicting advice. One person swears by a supplement. Another says it's a waste of money. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise, it's easy to start wondering if you're missing something. Maybe there's one more answer or one more piece to the puzzle, one more thing that you haven't tried yet. And I think that's what I want to talk about today. Not because I think learning is bad, not because I think supplements, testing, or advanced strategies don't have a place. They do. But because sometimes I wonder if we're spending so much time looking for the next fix that we miss the things that have been helping us all along. Before we go any further, a quick reminder, I'm not your doctor, and this podcast isn't intended to diagnose, treat, or replace individualized medical care. My goal is to share research, education, and practical insights to help you better understand your health and ask informed questions. As always, before making changes to your nutrition, supplements, medications, or healthcare plan, please consult with a qualified healthcare provider or practitioner who knows your individual situation. Today, I want to have a conversation about why we're so drawn to the next fix, why that tendency makes perfect sense, and why some of the most meaningful progresses I've seen, both personally and professionally, has come from returning to the fundamentals. I don't think most people go looking for the next fix because they're impatient. I think they go looking because they're hopeful. When you've been struggling with low energy, digestive issues, hormone symptoms, weight gain, poor sleep, or simply feeling unlike yourself, it's natural to want answers. And when someone promises a solution, it's hard not to pay attention. Maybe it's a supplement that claims to support metabolism. Maybe it's a gut protocol. Maybe it's a hormone test everyone seems to be talking about. Maybe it's a social media post that starts with, "No one is talking about this." And then suddenly it feels like you found that one missing piece. And for a moment, there's excitement. Maybe this is it. Maybe this is what's been missing. Maybe this is finally the thing that explains why I've been feeling this way. I think most of us have experienced that feeling at some point. I know I have. There's something comforting about believing the answer is right around the corner. Because if the answer is right around the corner, then maybe we don't have to sit with the uncertainty that we're experiencing right now. Maybe we don't have to wonder why we feel stuck. Maybe we don't have to be patient with a process that feels slower than we'd like. And honestly, I think that's what makes health so challenging sometimes. Most of us aren't looking for perfection. We're looking for relief. We want to feel better. We want to understand what's happening. We want some assurance that moving in that right direction. But what I've noticed most is the people who make the most meaningful progress with their health are rarely the people who find one magical answer. They're usually the people who learn how to stay grounded while they search. They ask questions, they learn, they explore options, but they don't abandon the basics every time a new solution comes along. And maybe that's where some of us get stuck. And we become so focused on finding the next thing that we stop paying attention to what's already working. Or we dismiss small improvements because they don't feel dramatic enough. The reality is that most lasting health changes don't happen overnight. They're usually much quieter than that, which isn't nearly as exciting as a miracle solution, but it tends to be a lot more sustainable. One of the most interesting things about living in today's world is that information has never been more accessible. If you want to learn about hormones, there's a podcast for that. If you want to learn about gut health, there are hundreds of books, blogs, videos, and social media accounts ready to teach you. If you want to learn about metabolism, you could spend the next 6 months listening to experts and still not run out of content. And in many ways, that's a gift. We have access to information that previous generations could only have dreamed about. But sometimes I wonder if all that information has created a new problem. Not a lack of knowledge, a lack of clarity. Because when you're constantly consuming information, it's easy to feel like you're making progress. You save the post, listen to the podcast, order the book, watch the webinar, research the supplement, and all of those things feel productive. But at some point, knowledge has to become action, and action has to become repetition. I've worked with women who knew exactly what blood sugar was, exactly why protein matters, exactly how stress impacts hormones, exactly why sleep is important. They weren't lacking information. What they were lacking was confidence. Confidence to stop second-guessing themselves. Confidence to choose a direction and stay with it long enough to see what happens. Confidence to believe they didn't need to know everything before taking the next step. And I understand that, because when you're not feeling your best, it's easy to think the answer is one more podcast away, one more expert away, or one more piece of information away. But sometimes the next step isn't learning something new. Sometimes it's asking yourself, what do I already know that I'm not doing consistently? That's not always the most exciting question, but it can be one of the most powerful, because real progress usually isn't built on knowing more. It's built on doing a few important things often enough that the body finally has a chance to respond. Something that's interesting is the habits that create the biggest impact are rarely the ones people get excited about. No one calls a friend because they finally got 8 hours of sleep. Nobody posts on social media because they drank enough water this week. And yet again, when I look back at clients who make meaningful progress, those ordinary habits show up again and again. Not because they were perfect, not because they followed every recommendation, but because they kept showing up for themselves in small ways. A little more protein at breakfast, a walk after dinner, getting to bed 30 minutes earlier, cooking at home a few more nights each week. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would go viral on social media. Just small decisions repeated often enough that the body finally had a chance to respond. And I think that's where many of us underestimate the power of the basics, because they don't feel like they're doing much in that moment. One walk doesn't seem life-changing. One good night's sleep doesn't suddenly transform your health. And one balanced meal doesn't solve every problem. But the body isn't responding to one day. It's responding to patterns. That's true for metabolism. It's true for hormones. It's true for digestion. It's true for energy. The body is always paying attention to what happens most often, not what happens occasionally. And maybe that's why the fundamentals matter so much. Not because they're exciting, not because they're trendy, but because they influence so many things at once. I've had women come to me convinced they needed a new supplement, only to realize they were running on 5 hours of sleep. Others were focused on hormones when they weren't eating enough protein to support the very systems they wanted to improve. Some were searching for answers in advanced testing while living under a level of stress that would make anyone feel exhausted. Again, this isn't about blame. It's about perspective. Sometimes the things we overlook are the very things that deserve our attention. And while those habits may not feel impressive, they often create the foundation that allows everything else to work better. It's a lot like the foundation of a house. Nobody admires the foundation, but without it, nothing else has a stable place to stand. I think one of the biggest misconceptions about health is the idea that successful people never get off track. We imagine that the people who are seeing results always make the healthy choice. They never miss a workout, they never eat dessert, they never have a stressful week, or they never even fall off their routine. But the more people I work with, the more I've realized that's usually not true. Life happens to all of us. Vacations happen, holidays happen, busy seasons happen, and stress happens. There are weeks when schedules get turned upside down and the things that normally support us get pushed to the side. The difference isn't that some people never get off track. The difference is that they know how to come back. They don't spend weeks or months waiting for the perfect Monday. They don't convince themselves they've ruined everything. They don't decide that one difficult week means they've failed. They simply return. They return to the walk. They return to the protein. They return to the bedtime routine. They return to the habits that help them feel their best. The older I get, the more I think that's one of the most important skills we can develop. Not discipline, not perfection, but the ability to return. Because health isn't built in a single day. It's built over months and years of ordinary decisions. Someday we'll do those things, some days we won't. That's part of being human. But every day gives us another opportunity to come back. I think that's why I don't love the all or nothing mindset that shows up so often in health. The idea that you're either on track or off track, doing well or failing, healthy or unhealthy. Real life rarely works that way. Most of us are somewhere in the middle, doing some things well, working on others, trying our best to navigate busy lives and changing circumstances. And that's okay, because progress doesn't come from getting everything right. It comes from returning often enough that the small things have time to add up. Maybe that's what consistency really looks like. Not perfection or rigid rules, not never missing a day, just developing the confidence that no matter what happens, you know how to return to the habits that support you. And over time, that ability to return may be more valuable than any supplement, protocol, or health trend you'll ever try. As I was thinking deeper on this episode, I couldn't help but notice how often we approach our spiritual lives the same way we approach our health. We find ourselves looking for the next thing that will finally make us feel settled, the next answer or breakthrough, the next season or circumstance, the thing that will finally allow us to relax and feel at peace. And while there's nothing wrong with wanting things to improve, I wonder if part of our struggle is believing that peace lives somewhere in the future. When the symptoms improve, when the weight comes off, when life slows down, when the lab work comes back normal, when we finally figure out everything. But Scripture points us towards something different. In Philippians chapter 4, verses 11 through 12, Paul writes, "I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances." What strikes me about that verse is that Paul says he learned it. Contentment wasn't something he automatically possessed. It wasn't something he discovered after everything worked out. It was something developed over time, something he practiced, something he learned in the middle of imperfect circumstances. And I think that's important because many of us spend so much time waiting for life to improve before we allow ourselves to actually experience peace. We tell ourselves, oh, we'll be okay once we reach that next milestone, once we solve that next problem, or once we get that answer we've been searching for. But what if contentment isn't found at the end of the journey? What if it's something we learn along the way? That doesn't mean we stop pursuing better health. It doesn't mean we stop learning. It doesn't mean we stop asking questions. It simply means we stop believing that our peace depends on finding the next answer. One of the themes we see throughout Scripture is the invitation to return. When we wander, we return. When we lose our footing, we return. When life becomes overwhelming, we return. Not because we've earned our way back, but because God continually invites us back. And maybe that's why the idea of returning matters so much, not just in our health, but in our faith. Both are built through small, repeated choices over time, not dramatic moments, not perfect execution, just a willingness to come back to the habits that support us, to come back to the truths that ground us, and to come back to the God who never stopped walking with us in the first place. I find a lot of comfort in that because it reminds me that progress isn't about perfection, it's about faithfulness. And faithfulness often looks a lot more ordinary than we expect. As we wrap up today's conversation, I want to leave you with one simple question. What if the next step isn't something new? What if it's returning to something you've known all along? Maybe it's getting to bed a little earlier. Maybe it's taking that walk you've been meaning to take. Maybe it's eating a little more protein, drinking a little more water, or creating a little more margin in your day. Not perfectly, and definitely not all at once. Just one small step in the right direction. Because while it's easy to believe the answer is always somewhere out ahead of us, I've found that some of the most meaningful progress happens when we return to the things that matter the most. If you like help thinking through things where to start, I've linked my free What I'd Start With guides in the show notes. Whether you're exploring hormone concerns, gut health issues, low energy, or simply wondering what foundations deserve your attention, these guides can help you think through the next steps. You'll also find my full script storefront where I share the supplement brands and products I personally trust and recommend. And if you're taking nothing else away from today's episode, remember this: progress isn't built on perfection, it's built on returning. So until next time, friend, stay nourished, stay steady, and choose wellness one thoughtful step at a time.